everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast. And today I am just really tickled pink to have Jody Levison-Johnson on. I spoke at a conference that her organization was putting on for their members and clients, and it was such a fun time. I was able to try out some new things and meet with great people who really were on a great mission and really focusing on how do we change the world, really. And so I'm excited to have you here, Jody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here for sure.
So where are you? Tell everybody where you are right now in your leadership journey.
Gosh, so right now I would say I look at that question in multiple ways. One is, I'm constantly learning on my leadership journey. And so right now I'm learning in my current role as CEO of Social Current, which is a network of human service organizations. We offer services to those organizations. We accredit them. We provide technical assistance consultation. We do policy and advocacy work to try to ensure that the environment that the organizations operate in is actually conducive to implementation of best practice. And so my job is both external, being a leader in the human and social services field, but then internal, like really leading the staff and the organization towards this new realization, because we are the result of a merger that we did back in 2021. So it's been a journey for us. So I'd say and learning is like my leadership journey. It characterizes everything I do. Every day I learn something new, both what I should be doing or maybe what I shouldn't be doing.
Isn't that leadership, isn't it? It is a journey. It really
Absolutely.
is that. Ups and downs, hills and valleys. There's just no way around it.
Absolutely. And I've had plenty of hills and valleys. And what it's sort of sad. I've almost started to predict if I have a super high hill day, then undoubtedly, then there seems to be the valley, like within the next couple of days, it's like peaks and valleys all the time and highs and lows, and really trying to negotiate that and keep my sort of equilibrium and minimize reactivity. That's what I've realized I need to do most often.
That requires so much intentionality to keep. I'm not going to use the word balance because I hate that, but kind of just to keep. I like the equilibrium idea where it's like you just like tweak to kind of stay more on an even kill. I love the idea of not being reactive, but being intentional and thoughtful about your responses.
Well, and I think that's the sort of the biggest thing I've learned. And I agree with you on the balance thing. I think we're frequently out of balance, but like if we can get comfortable and find a space that, allows us to feel okay in sort of the fact that sometimes things creep up and take over, and sometimes it's like the ebb and flow of life. And I don't think you're ever really in balance, but if you can be in a space where you're at least sort of comfortable being unbalanced, maybe that's what it is. So but yeah, reactivity is it's been a hallmark of sort of my personality, really, and what I've had to work on probably most in my leadership journey.
So having said that, what would you say your team would say? How would they describe you as a leader, and what words would they use?
There's like what I hope they'd say and then what I think they'd say. And I think there's probably a blend of both of those things. So, I really try to be available and accessible and authentic and just genuine, which sometimes also means that I am, too quick to react, can be super opinionated, and definitely like very direct and honest. And so those things, like they can be both like your greatest assets, but they can also be sort of Achilles heels for you. So, but what I really, when we did this values exercise not that long ago as a team, and when I had to like winnow it down to the one value that was most important to me, it was authenticity. Like I really needed to make sure that I was my authentic self showing up. And even if that's sometimes with my warts and all, so that's one of the things I work on. And hopefully the warts are getting smaller, but at least they're authentic.
I like that idea, actually. I often will say, like, be authentic, or, when I want you to be authentic, I don't want you to be authentically a jerk. And so it's right. Hey, I'm just being me. And it's like that, like be you culture to me. The reason why I'm not in love with it is because I think it excuses poor behavior. And so I love that you're like hyper aware of that, and that you also know that you have to temper it at the same time, which is like a higher emotional intelligence level. Because a lot of people just think like, I'm just being me. Like what? Yeah, but that is highly offensive to like 25 other people in the office. Like, let's just kind of adjust a little bit.
Absolutely. And that's, I mean, it makes me think back to like the sort of like one of the first sort of leadership lessons that I learned. And honestly, it all stems to this whole kind of like being your authentic self, but then also being sort of like what you said, not a jerk. And so this was like I think it was probably, if I had to be honest, like my first like real felt like a leadership position for me. I had been a leader in other roles, but this one really felt like there was something big at stake for me. And so this was like, God, it was like over 20 years ago. And I was in this role where I was leading the county's public behavioral health services for children. And so it was my responsibility to make sure like the services that were being offered in this county were, appropriate, were of sufficient quality, that they were monitored, that they were using their money well, like all those things. And so I was in a meeting with the president of the company I worked for, because it was a private nonprofit that did this work for the county. So I was in a meeting with the president of the company I worked for, but then also the county's mental health director. So I was accountable to both of those people, even though I was like the person they had like designated to lead children's services. And so we were talking about this big transition with one of the providers in the county. And it was like something that I had proposed that was changing up sort of the way we did business and the way the service array was going to work in the county. And so like my thought, and like I really believed I was right, but my thought was, if we do this change, it's going to improve the access that children, families have to care. And it's also going to improve the way that that like people are screened for care so that they're getting the right service at the right time and the right intensity. And I knew I was right. Like I just knew it. And this was my area of expertise. This was my area of responsibility, all the things that we sort of tell ourselves about what we know. So the discussion is going on and we're talking about this. And all of a sudden, these other things start to creep into the decision making. And these things I think were really about like relationships people had, connections, some politics. And so as a result of like those things, the decision was made that we were going to pause on moving forward with my idea. But like, as you can imagine, like I knew I was right. So I was pushing and I was pushing and I was pushing. And my pushing, it really irritated people. And it also, I think, truly invalidated the input that particularly the president of the organization that I worked for was giving. And, because he was no children's expert, I was the children's expert. And so like after the meeting, I had this like aha moment where I was like, man, I really overstepped there and I am going to be in big trouble. Cause like, this is the president of the company. And it actually took him a few days to calm down enough to talk to me. So when he finally like called me to his office, I've always said to everyone who I tell the story to that I got my most empowering spanking that I've ever gotten in my life, but it was a spanking nonetheless. I mean, it was like, I definitely got that feeling that I had crossed the line. And he said to me, Jody, your mouth is your biggest asset. It is also your biggest potential liability. And like I said, it was over 20 years ago. I think about this all the time. And so, because I know I definitely have opinions, and it's kind of what I was saying about what staff think of me. Like I have opinions, I'm direct, I'm honest, and I don't hold back. But what I learned from that and what I use as a leader all the time is like, if you've got a mouth like I do, which tends to use a lot of words and have a lot of opinions, you just need to be careful with it because it is an asset, but it's also a liability. The other thing was my boss at the time, after I got this incredibly empowering spanking, sat down with me and said, we got to work on this. Like this is going to trip you up in your career. And we came up with this mantra, which was delay and analyze. And I say it all the time to myself, even to this day. I teach it to people. And so it's like this idea that if you're feeling something intensely and like, you can feel that stuff in your body where you're like tensing up or you feel this tightness in your chest or anything, I stop myself and I was like, delay and analyze, do not respond right now. The other things I learned, which I think are important leadership lessons, is like never underestimate like that there's politics at play in almost everything, and there's relationships and connections. And so if you're going to lead, you got to learn how to like negotiate that and to leverage those things and not to be tripped up or thwarted or frustrated by them because they exist. And then I think the other thing, which goes back to what I said earlier about trying to be like, an inclusive and authentic leader, is not to devalue the input of others. So even when I don't agree, I've started to realize and really believe that the ultimate outcome that comes from people having dissenting views or differing opinions is actually, it's your outcome is informed, it's stronger, it's better when you include people and other opinions other than your own. And then last but never least, apologies and ownership are super, super important. And so make those apologies and then take the accountability, because without that, I think people sometimes get stuck. And so when I got called into his office after I got the spanking, I totally owned my stuff. I was like, I knew I was out of line. I should have backed down. I should have quieted down, and I'm truly sorry. And it's something I'm committed to working on. And so I think those are that's definitely like that reactivity. It started, over 20 years ago and sticks with me, but those are the things that I try to work on to be more effective as I lead.
That is a huge lesson. As I was listening to you, so I have a new book coming out in April called The Art of Active Listening: How People at Work Feel Heard, Valued, and Understood. And as you were talking about this idea of kind of like pause and analyze, or delay and analyze, it makes me think of I have a step in that model called decoding. And it really is that like reflection time where we hear someone, we're listening to them, we hear they give us, they want us to do something potentially, or they tell us something that we probably should do something about. Many of us want to go act fast, like we want to go run fast. But that decoding phase, which is what we're really talking about in a kind of a little bit turned on its head concept, is actually validating the other person's voice even more, because we aren't so reactive. We aren't now they don't feel discounted because we are pausing and analyzing. Now they're like, okay, whatever they do, as a response to what they've heard me say. And now I feel like they have respected me because they've taken more of what I said into consideration, and by not responding, by not stating their opinion, but by like sitting on it and researching it and discussing it with other people. I do. And I feel like it is the place where many of us, not just you, Jody, many of us fall down, where we just want to be responsive. We want to be reactive. And in this case, it's like, we want to be reactive to kind of show someone that we care or that we've heard them, so that we don't want to act real fast. But it's in that spot of that delay, that delaying the desire, in your case, the desire to be right and state that. But in any other case, like that desire to say, like, what's the other side? What have we done? It actually minimizes the other person. We don't really think about that. And so that pause allows you to maximize the person.
I think it's a really good point. I never thought about it that way, but when you said that, it was like, yes, that makes total sense. And I think it is our instinct, I think, to immediately respond. And I think like society culture sort of has created that, like, right, you've got like your phone and you get a text and you're supposed to respond, and email, someone wants an answer, like even like, it sounds silly, but the microwave, you used to have to spend time cooking things, and now you can instantly get popcorn in like 2 minutes, it's like all this. So I think our culture is sort of like pushing us to move fast. And what is really a better, more I don't know, deep way of leading and learning is to just slow down a bit. And I'm not always great about doing that. I mean, and I think part of it is when you're a leader, people turn to you and they want answers. And if you say, I need to think about this, or let me give it some time, like people are like eager to cross things off their list, or they just want to know how to solve it. I mean, I can be the same way. So I see both sides of it, but that whole idea of really like maximizing that person's experience and taking the time, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. Oh, this is so good. Like, this is, yeah. That's something that'll make me, because the book now is like it's been penned now. So there's really not any edits I can do.
Awesome.
I've done some of this on here, but this is like this right here, this conversations is a good kind of parallel conversation. And I think it's helping me to think through times I've done it, because just because I write about or speak about anything does not mean I'm calling myself like I'm perfect at this. That's absolutely the opposite. In fact, many times I feel like I write for myself, like it's a lesson I just had to learn, and then I may have had to learn it a few times. And so I pen it, or I speak about it, whatever, just to kind of help other people that could be faced with it. But it doesn't mean I'm perfect at it, you know?
That's absolutely. And I think that's this, I've struggled at times with the concept of people calling anybody an expert, because it's like, it's like we all have relevant knowledge, expertise, whatever, but being an expert, like, I just don't think, like, to me, that runs contrary to who I want to be as a person, which is I want to constantly be learning and growing. And if you're an expert, I think some people just think, well, they're at the top of their game, they've got nothing to learn. But if we stop learning, like, we're in big trouble, I think. And I think there's leaders who do that. I mean, I think, I can think back to some people that I have seen lead before in my life that I'm like, that actually some of my style is sort of I'm reacting to that person. Like, I will never be like X and insert a name, and it's like, I will never do X because that's so-and-so did that. And so I just really like, it's like this idea that it just made me think of this. You were talking about writing the book, because you're right. People see a book author and they're like, oh, this person knows they
In
got
and out.
And I love that you're like saying, hey, sometimes I do it for myself, because it's a huge part of it.
Oh my gosh. In the book, my last book, I'd have to say that like the Art of Caring Leadership, that one was probably about, I got that about by 80%. So like I'm in that caring leadership side, I'm probably about 80% accurate, right? I would say with the list, I'm just going to be true. I mean, like, it is what it is, but I would say like, that's the closest to, it's hard to say even expert, because I hate the word too, but it's like closest to kind of getting it, or getting like an A in or A minus or whatever kind of thing. And then everything else around that, it's like this next one is like, no, I'm telling this to me for myself and for you and for the benefit of all of us on this planet in the workplace, because I would not say I'm 80% there.
Well, and I think it's a great way to sort of promote some of bringing more voices into the field and into the conversation. Like, I think there's also this sort of paradigm that you have to be an expert if you're going to write a book. And like, instead, it maybe gives you sort of the rigor or the structure you need to do the deep thinking about something, or maybe to dig into something a little bit more. So as I'm listening to, I'm like, yeah, that book that has always eluded me, like, maybe that's like what I've got to do to sort my stuff out, because I definitely, like, I have this running list of ideas that it's like, oh, if I had the time, I might spend some time writing about this, because that's, I think, another part of like sort of that reflective leadership stuff that I do. Like, I write things. They may be things that I only write for me, or sometimes they end up in a blog for our organization or up on LinkedIn or something. But I really I do that reflection, because like, it goes to that delay and analyze. Like, I think part of being a leader is really being reflective and being comfortable when you know you blew it. Like, that's just, and I think sometimes for me, like, when I think about like when I've dug in on a position or felt something intensely, and I'm like, what's going on for me? And I start to reflect and I write about it, then I come out of that with a deeper understanding of either where I am and why, or why I might not be right, which I think is really good. So anyway, I can't wait to see the book, Heather.
Oh gosh, I can't wait to see yours now that you're telling me.
It's,
Telling me that
someday, like in retirement,
Oh yeah, we will talk about that offline. Okay, so now we're at the point of the podcast where you get to ask me any question, given what you know about my background. What question might you have of me that you think would be relevant for listeners or helpful for you?
So, I did give this some thought, because I'm like, oh God, she, like, again, thinking about that expert thing. But, I mentioned that as Social Current, we had just gone through this merger. And so we've brought together these two organizations that have different cultures. We've done it totally amongst the pandemic. And so with that as the backdrop, we've all been remote. People are scattered across the country. Everybody's working from home. And, we've done our best to try to create an engaged workforce and a new culture for Social Current. And I think some of it's going well, and other parts of it, I'm like, oof, and so any advice, because I know that's your background, like any advice you have about how do you help create culture that feels good to people, that people feel connected to, when you're all remote, you're geographically dispersed, and you come from these legacy organizations that are a little different in terms of sort of how they operated. So any advice you have on that front, I'd willingly take.
Oh man, I remember I'm on this journey actually because of a merger of 5 companies. I was in one of the companies, and then it ended up being like a layoff, and there were over 200 of us laid off, and I was in that, and so I know what it feels like first to go through a merger and also to go through a couple of reorgs. So like change inside of organizations and being impacted multiple times is a really tough time. And here's like two-part response to it. One is that often what happens is we feel like things are happening to us. We really feel quite victimized in the change process. And it is because the organizations that go through the change aren't doing what I think is the second part of is my response in a way that makes people feel heard. And that is the listening stuff. So I do think that organizations that include more voices in the change that is happening up front and during and after are the ones that can sustain it longer and have more buy-in. So, for example, creating culture teams or even change committees, putting a process in place for the change that has more voices, not just those from the top, maintaining like culture teams throughout and afterward, where they're handling their team members' feedback or angst or concerns and bringing it to the executive leaders who have the power to do something about it. And those executive leaders are listening to that feedback because it's an aggregate, and those people are taking the time to listen. So when I think of inclusion, I think of voices. I think of including voices around a table in the change that people are seeking, in the change that's going to happen inevitably. So let's just get us all involved and make sure we hear everybody. And I think when people feel like that, the culture is good, no matter if they're in the office or not. I'm telling you, I run a fully virtual team. And it's not a massive team. It's not as big as yours, but having said that, I've seen the things that you have to do. You have to be more intentional. I've seen that if I include them more around the decisions that we're looking to get done, they feel bought in and like they're doing meaningful work. And when I leave them out or I accidentally forget to include them, I can see that how hurt they are because they're used to me asking them and including them. And if I don't, then it's like, oops, I forgot. And of course I go back and go, oops, I'm sorry. I totally forgot to include you. So yes, there's an expectation set up that they will be included more often, but there's also this like huge, like almost like ownership buy-in, like this, like if they feel like they're owning the result more when you include their voices. So that's what I would say the biggest thing would be to do is.
Thanks. That's super helpful. And I think, I was thinking about like what's sometimes the biggest like challenge within leadership. And it is this inclusivity, because it's like really kind of gauging when you've done it enough, like what's inclusive enough, where you should be inclusive, when as a leader you could move forward without necessarily bringing every voice in, and I think it sort of boils down to like defining it, and then being aware of also the time investment it takes, because to truly be and it goes back to what you and I were talking about slowing down. It's like being inclusive requires an intentionality, and not just jump into the answer, but making the time to get the people around the table, virtually or in person, to have that conversation. So that's super helpful.
Absolutely. And I think that whole idea of like when to decide, like when is it too much is a really good thing to be thinking about, because we all have to have it. I wish I could tell you like a strong, and I had tried to do that as much as I could in the book. We're like giving people like a decision matrix to like do certain things so they could ask themselves these questions, and based upon the response that would help them down this road. I tried to do as much as I could, but some of it you just have to go on your own. And I would say that I think it's important to include at every turn of change. So every time a change is going to happen, include a certain amount of voices. You have to decide which voices those are. But there is a point where we have to move forward or nothing gets done. And so I think that the leader has to decide for themselves, like, have I left an important person or group or function out of this? They have to ask themselves that question. And then if they have, they go, "Oop, I better make sure that somehow that function's included before this change takes place." I remember I worked at this organization, and it was like let's just say it had a healthcare component, that it was really like a life and death. It was a blood bank. And
Okay.
if we made certain changes and we didn't include certain areas, it could have like an FDA type of, could be like a big issue, a health impact or whatever. But I love the way they had this entire change process that made sure that they would announce the change in this like change meeting, and then it would give everybody in that meeting to say, "Oops, please keep me abreast of what's happening in this change," like almost like raise their hand to be on the list of people notified of what's happening and kept abreast of it. And then that means that, like, if before the change came to an end, that department, let's say, was going to always have a voice in it. And so even though that was more like a little bit more of a life and death feel, I absolutely loved that process because it was a process. It was standardized, and the level of inclusiveness was there because you got a chance to raise your hand to be included in knowing. I mean, think about that in the workplace. If people could just like raise their hand and be like, "Oh, we need to be like, this is something that our department should have a hand in because," okay, great, we'll add you to the list of those who are updated. Who does that? No one ever does that.
But it seems like it's such common sense. Like, do you need to be included? Do you want to be included? Like, just asking that question. And then, definitely, I think you're right, though. It's up to the leader, because some things I'm like, I don't need to hear a million opinions on this one. I have a kind of a good sense of it. And also, I think it's really important. So we're going to move forward. And I think those are fewer and far between where that happens. But there are some things like, it's like, are we going to get together for an in-person meeting? I don't need a million opinions on that, because the answer is yes, we are. We are.
Yes.
That's important to creating kind of connection. So we can ask people, but if they say no, then they feel unheard. And like, so I'm like, let's not ask, because I think it's really important. We're a new
Yes.
organization. So it's
Yes.
that balance, though. It's such a tightrope.
It is. It is. It really is. I love this. This is such a great discussion. I could literally go on this for days. I love it. Love it. Love it. Okay. So for those who are listening right now, and they are looking for, some extra leadership motivation, they're looking for some tips. They're like, what might be just a couple pearls of wisdom? It could be a restatement of something you've already said, or something else that might be new that you're thinking about.
I think a couple things come to mind. They're things that I struggle with even today, but one is, I think you have to be forgiving of yourself. Like, you have to give yourself permission to get it wrong. I think as a leader, if like, it's sometimes like, it goes back to that expert thing we were talking about, like, we all mess up. And so like, expect to mess up as a leader, own it, learn from it, give yourself some grace, and see that like opportunity as an opportunity for growth. So I think about that, like, because I think we're all pretty good at beating ourselves up, and we take a lot of that from others. And so I don't know that we're necessarily needing to do that. And I think that's the other sort of second part of this, which I feel like I've learned many, many times, is it, thicken your skin, which is something I've been working on for a long time. It's like, as a leader, you can take shots from all sides sometimes. And it's the nature of the position that you're going to be sort of the person who's held up there. And so I think sometimes you can really feel like, I mean, the way I sometimes feel is like Swiss cheese. Like, I've got like this incomplete and holy feeling because I just feel like everybody's poking at me. And so what I would say is like, just like, don't let that happen. Like, don't take everything. I mean, it's important to take it personally enough to reflect and see what you can learn. But then once you've done that, take it for what it's worth, like, and move on. Don't get caught up in that negative narrative of yourself as a leader.
I love that. That might be one of a more unique thing I've heard anybody say here. And I've had like 250 interviews. So I really love that last one, is not getting kind of like, take it in enough to learn, but not to get caught up, because it really can serve as, it can create blind spots, and it can make us more reactive versus more intentional. So yeah, I think that's a really good ad there. I really appreciate
Okay.
that. So for those who are listening, hopefully you've taken it, and I'm like just thinking, I'm taking notes. It's like such good stuff here, bringing out lots of good things to think about, and make sure you share this far and wide. That's important for other leaders to be able to get to access to it too. So Jody, thank you so much for being on here. This has been a great little treasure for me today, and just for the weeks to come, especially.
For me as well. Thanks, Heather, for having me.
And thanks everybody for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. Be well.